Is this one really worth 1,000% more than this one? Maybe. Hey everybody, welcome back to the studio. In this video, we're going to be talking about stitching clamps. These are also referred to as stitching ponies, and I don't know why. So I'm going to cover 3 different versions of stitching clamps that you can get. The basic version that you can just find on Amazon, no name. They're cheap, they're affordable, they're readily accessible. Then we'll move on to this popular design, which you've seen before, and then we'll finish off with the Cadillac of stitching clamps, the Maxita. So this topic came up because somebody asked a question on a short that I did a while back where I was unboxing the Maxita. So user Michael Smith-EP7JQ asked, what are the chances that you make a more in-depth video on the Maxita, as there's nothing much out there? Thanks. So thank you, Michael J. Smith-EP7JQ. If you want to go ahead, skip right to the Maxita section, you can check the description below. I've listed all the chapters there. You can also find a link there to get one of these for yourself. Let's get into it. Okay, so starting out with the most basic, this is the one I'm going to recommend if you're just starting out in leathercraft. It's super affordable, 20 bucks at the time of filming. It doesn't require any sort of clamping to a desk surface. You just sit on this part and you stitch right there. There aren't any bells and whistles. It's super simple, super basic, but it gets the job done. So overall, the structure is pretty simple on these. It's got the main clamp. It's got its base, which is secured with a basic little wing nut. When tightened down, it does hold pretty solid. The jaw capacity is 10 inches and the jaw width is 2 inches. Now this is a very good jaw capacity if you end up doing stuff like bags, but I do find with 10 inches of throat capacity and 2 inches of jaw width, it's a little disproportionate. I would like to see this at maybe 2.5, 3 inches. I think that'd be more proportional with the actual depth that you get. So to open and close the jaws, it's just a simple little toggle switch that when loose, it opens the jaws. When you press it down, it closes it. Doesn't get much more basic than that. It's a nice little clamp that works really well. They've also added this little triangular wood piece to prevent your thread from getting caught on the actual toggle. Now despite that, I still have had many instances where the thread does get caught underneath here, and in some cases actually loosens off the clamp itself. So to actually use it, you just sit right here on it, and then you can actually rotate this piece to the right or to the left, depending on which hand you want to use the toggle with. Now, the only problem with this is when this piece rotates, the little wing nut that's in here comes loose. So it's a bit of a pain in the butt in that regard. You constantly have to tighten this back down so that this stays nice and stable. One thing I find that in practice, when you're sitting on this, the angle at which you're stitching at is basically right on top of the workpiece. So if you're stitching for a long period of time, this can actually get quite uncomfortable because you're looking straight down at your workpiece and stitching directly over top of it. And also, sitting on a piece of wood for a few hours, it's not that comfortable. Overall, it does work pretty well, but I do find that depending on the chair you're using, whether it's a solid wood stool or a soft, comfortable chair, I find the actual stitching experience is a little bit unstable. Because you're just sitting on it, I do find that this piece can have a tendency to rock back and forth, left to right, all over the place. I prefer when the stitching clamp is rock solid and it is not going to move and it holds the workpiece nice and secure. This one, there's definitely a lot of movement in the stitching just because of the nature of how this thing works. On a side note, that's also why I stitch with a clamp. I don't like stitching without a clamp because I find everything's just moving all around and I just don't find it that comfortable. One thing I do find while you're stitching is that if this thing ends up moving around, the base is moving or shifting around, this wing nut can actually come loose and then the whole clamp piece could start pivoting around. And then you got to stop, tighten it. It's just a bit of a pain in the butt. I'll also note the leather added on these jaws here, I did after the fact. It came without it, and I found that the raw wood on here was just a little too sharp, a little too coarse, and was marking up the leather. So you are going to have to add a leather lining on the jaws. One good thing I will say about this is because it's all made from fairly thin wood, you can actually modify this quite a bit. So you could take this base off, secure this to something else, drill holes where you need it. It can easily be modified if you want to. You can even actually rebuild the whole thing if you just want to pay for the hardware. Pros and cons. It's affordable, it's readily available, it's very simple to use. It does not require any surface to clamp to. You just need a chair, a stool, anything to sit on. And it's got good jaw capacity. Some of the cons, it's really cheap, flimsy construction. the threads catch on the toggle. There's a small jaw width compared to its capacity. It's a super awkward stitching position, and after a few hours of stitching, it gets really uncomfortable. Okay, moving on, you've probably seen this style of clamp made by many different makers. This particular one is made by Romanov tools, and this is the Verter model. And at 70 bucks, this is a really good price for this style of clamp. I've seen other ones by other companies and other makers that are much more expensive than this, so I'm not sure the difference, but given this style of clamp, I think 70 bucks is still a pretty good range, even if you're just starting out. Its jaw capacity is 6 inches top to bottom and 2 inches across the actual jaw face, which is pretty good if you're just doing wallets. This is a great size to get. So the design itself is fairly straightforward. To open and close the jaws, you just use this large hand screw to open up the jaws, and then this spring that's in here keeps the jaws open, so it's easier to get the wallet in and out. This little feature is actually pretty handy because if you're always using the same thickness of wallet, you can actually kind of get this set so your wallet can just slide right in, and then you only require half to a full turn to get that locked right down. The clamp itself secures to the work surface with this little guide screw. You just rotate out to slide onto your table surface and then lock it down. The total capacity in this jaw is actually 2 inches if this is rotated all the way down. So you can clamp quite a thick tabletop with this particular model. If you happen to be a situation where you have an apron on your table or your workbench, you can actually rotate this and then clamp it this way so it slides up underneath. This is how I first started using this clamp, and it worked really well because then you can rotate this piece forward and back, giving yourself a nice angle, makes it a little more comfortable to stitch. Unfortunately, because these hand screws are on the outside and they do have lots of little grooves, your thread gets caught in here all the time. That's just one of those things with these style of clamps. It's always getting caught underneath here or underneath here. Now you can sand down the interior of these hand screws to make it nice and rounded so the thread is less likely to get caught. I didn't do that, but that's definitely a modification you can do to make this a little more user-friendly. Another point, the little nylon pad that secures this to the bottom of the work table does have a tendency to slide around if you don't clamp it down enough. It would be nice if this was maybe made from metal or brass that could actually have a bit of texture on there and then grab to the bottom of the surface so that this thing doesn't rotate when it's secured to the tabletop. It also has these little magnets on each side, which helps hold your needles. I've never used them, but they're there. So, pros and cons. This is more affordable than other models that I've seen that are of the same design. It's a solid construction that doesn't have any movement when you're actually stitching. It's good capacity for small leather goods. There's versatile mounting options, being able to mount to the front of the table or underneath onto an apron. And because of that, it's comfortable to use. Some of the cons, definitely catches thread easily because of these knurled hand nuts. And the base screw with a nylon head does require quite a bit of pressure to get it tight. So if you want the most versatile, comfortable stitching experience money can buy, this is probably it. So at $235 US, this is easily the most expensive stitching pony that I think you can actually buy. Now keep in mind, it is made from solid wood. This is beautiful black walnut. You can also get it in cherry. Both incredibly nice woods. They're actually my two favorite woods to work when I'm doing some woodworking. The actual arm clamping system is incredibly robust. It can clamp in nearly any direction you can need and in almost any orientation. The jaw capacity is 9 inches and the jaw width is 2 1/4. So although this isn't far off from the basic one, I actually find this is much more proportioned to small to medium-sized leather goods. So the actual clamping mechanism is similar to the basic model with a toggle clamp design, except this one is a lot more advanced. The actual toggle handle itself sits recessed underneath the surface so that thread will never get caught on this no matter what you do. The only issue with this actual toggle is that the thumb hole used to grab the actual bar itself is way too small, and it makes it incredibly difficult to actually get the toggle out of that recessed position. That's why you see here, I added this little leather wrap, which definitely helps. The only problem is that it does create a snag point on this design. So I'm still working on this, trying to come up with a different solution so I can easily open up those jaws and then close them flush. The other thing with this toggle design is that once it's closed, if you need to loosen or tighten the jaws up here, you just rotate this piece and you can see the jaws open up nice and smooth. So if you need to add a little bit more clamping pressure, you just need to rotate this. Makes it really easy, really intuitive to use. The other amazing thing about this design is this ball joint that's right into here. This is what connects the actual clamp to the actual base that then inserts into the piece that's mounted to your tabletop. So how this works, you just loosen that, and then this completely rotates freely. Lock that in, and then it's locked secure. This makes it incredibly easy to swing this in and out of the way when it's in use. The table clamp mechanism itself is also incredibly robust with these super large hand screws that make it very easy to adjust where this is going to sit in relation to where it's clamped to the table. The capacity of the clamping surface within here is about 4 inches, so you can effectively clamp this entire thing to the side edge of a 2x4. And to lock it all down, there's an Allen key right on the end, which is provided, and this provides all the torque that you need to get this locked down so it does not move once it's installed. You can install this on a work surface, either in this orientation with this post going up and down, giving you lots of vertical movement, or you can rotate it the other way where it includes this handy little cork feature for your needles. This is good if you end up sitting down while you're stitching, because then you have more movement lower. You can also orient this left to right to give yourself more side to side movement depending on the situation and how you're set up. One thing I am going to note about these 2 screws in particular, because it's a clam design and it just clamps onto this, you do need to provide quite a bit of torque to get this locked down so it doesn't move. The problem with that, as you can see when I grab it, my knuckles get in the way. So it's actually very difficult to clamp this down solid enough so it doesn't move. You end up really having to kind of torque it down. It's actually quite uncomfortable to get this one locked down. This one you can see it's got lots of room, so it's easier to clamp down. Now with that said, because you can take this whole piece right off, you can orient this around so that that one slides in there, or so this slides in there. So depending on your configuration, that actually may not be an issue depending on the structure of your actual table that you're clamping to. The only other problem I had with this during assembly is that these 2 large screws here did not come with it. What they came with was 2 little set screws with Allen key heads. Now the problem I had with these included set screws is that they weren't long enough to completely bottom out in the diameter of this tube, which means this whole head mechanism moved all over the place. I binned those screws, happened to have these 2 screws that fit the diameter perfectly, screwed these in, locked this piece into the ball joint solidly. So without that, the movement was way too much. So note that when you get this, it's probably going to come with 2 just basic set screws that don't actually have a head on top of them. You're going to need to upgrade those. Pros and cons. It's robust, that's for sure. Significant mounting options. So depending on how your situation is set up, you're going to be able to get this mounted in exactly the way you want it. It's very simple to use. There's no thread snagging, and it's made from very high quality materials. Some of the cons, it's definitely the most expensive stitching clamp you're going to get. And because of that price point, some of the things that I had to do to modify it should probably be addressed in the actual manufacturing process. So if you're just starting out in leathercraft, I encourage you to get the cheapest one to see if you even like it and whether you're going to continue in the craft rather than spending a whole bunch of money on something you're actually never going to use. If you've gotten into the craft, you realize you really like it, you want to continue with it, consider upgrading to a middle of the range clamp. It's going to do you perfectly fine for most of your leather crafting needs, and you'll have no real need to upgrade. If you got a bunch of money lying around and you want the best, get the Maxita. So to answer that question, is it really worth 1,000% more to get the Maxita versus the basic stitching pony? Yeah, it's worth every penny. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment section below. If you want to see any other review videos on basically anything related to leatherwork, also let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see what I'm doing on a daily basis, head over to Instagram, norfolk.handmade. And if you want to support me directly, head over to my website, norfolkhandmade.com, where you can purchase a wallet or some plants. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.